Question or observation. Does the materials from Project Primrose remain in the secret site on CR3? Research topic. Nuclear power has been used in the 7 cities for decades. The MSU has regularly partnered with the 7 cities to continue research while within the nuclear power plants. Invaluable nuclear research has been conducted this way for decades. However, with the sudden shutdown of CR3 near the border of Swamp City and Isle City, much of the research and personnel on Project Primrose never made it off-site. CR3 is one of the 5 power plants within the region, but unlike the other 4, which still burn coal, CR3 is a pressurized water reactor getting power from water heated by nuclear fission and a power capacity of 860 megawatts. CR3 also has a civilian population of 24,000 within the 10-mile plume range and over 1 million within the 50-mile contamination range of the power plant. Despite its public location, CR3 provided a perfect place for Project Primrose. A full third of CR3's power capacity could power the lab, and test subjects could be easily recruited from Swamp City's infill just a few kilometers away. The background radiation of CR3 would also discourage any would-be investigators from discovering the expected increase of radiation from Project Primrose. Security would also be easy to justify because of how much security is demanded from nuclear power plants, and most civilians do not pry too deeply into nuclear power plants, fearing mutation or contamination. Non-MSU staff working on CR3 will already be valued for their discretion and their clearance level for knowing top-secret projects. It is highly unlikely that any of them will think of Project Primrose as anything but another part of CR3 that they are not on a need-to-know basis. Need-to-know projects have been in use by both the 7 cities government and corporations for decades by this point, with mostly positive results. Project Primrose was a project that had the goal of creating cheaper sources of transmuting elements without the use of particle accelerators or other traditional sources. The goal is to create exotic elements that provide delta radiation at a safer and lower cost. It is believed that Project Primrose was at least partially successful, and that the research available would save years, if not decades, on attempts to replicate the research. The sudden closure of CR3 was done because of the discovery of cracks in the concrete shielding during routine maintenance that led to the evacuation of all staff. It was initially believed that they would get it fixed within the year. After 5 years, the Imperial government declared CR3 unfit to return to function, and the process of safe storage of all components of the power plant began. The political situation with the local duke led to breakdowns in diplomatic attempts between the local MSU charter and the Imperial family when 3 different diplomatic staff of the MSU were found in their homes with their bones filled with lead, and 13 of the duke's staff were found to have perished from heart attack in retaliation, all within the same hour. More clandestine means of obtaining the research appear to be the most effective means of recovering the research before it is rendered beyond reach permanently. Hypothesis. Invaluable research and possibly materials remain within the site in CR3. The continuation of safe storage will soon make access to the hidden section of CR3 impractical, if not impossible, before the year's end. We believe if we send in a third-party agent, they may be able to bring back the main hard drive containing the research. And as long as directions are followed carefully, no one will be harmed. Test or experiment parameters. Agent Creeping Jenny, the third-party agent, will enter CR3 at night and will be able to enter the hidden part of the site and retrieve the missing information. Work doesn't occur at night, and security has been more than lacking during the initial observations. Creeping Jenny has proven useful in other urban expeditions and is believed to be useful in this expedition. Estimated cost is to be less than 1,000 centi. Exploration log by a third-party agent, Creeping Jenny. The following journal was found on the property of Agent Creeping Jenny Access to the physical journal is restricted due to radiation and chemical risk. Full scans of the journal are available upon request. So, my newest gig came in through email, as normal. So, showtime, I guess. My boss, some suit from Imperial City that never bothered to meet me in person, gave me another mousing job. Whoever this guy is, he's some kind of high-level Vigilus Urbani. He used the term the gardener for himself and called me Creeping Jenny. No clue what that means, but every check he sends me through the mail clears without problem and has my legal name on it. The name on my checks even updated when I transitioned without me having to tell him, so good on my VU boss for not being a transphobe. I'm not sure where he heard of me from. What I do know is that I was mousing for years when he discovered me. Mousing is, if you didn't already know, where you explore parts of the city that are either hidden, abandoned, or just an unusual place to see. Some people called it urban exploration, or urbex, or building hacking, or even trespassing. But me, I always called it mousing because I felt like a mouse sniffing out all these hidden places and treasures. I've been doing it since high school, when it is discovered that the rumors were true and that the teachers did have their own personal pool buried beneath the school gym. That feeling of being able to find somewhere that was hidden and how I was able to prove it to the others made me feel so alive. So I spent my last 5 years of high school going through all the places I could in my little town, taking pictures and putting it on Share My Day, making a little bit of money where I could. And when others in my graduating class were moving on to guild work, university, or even trade school, I was busy living life, showing the world all of the hidden places beneath their feet. One day, though, I got caught when I broke into the Riley house in River City. I knew the residents were dead for over 100 years, but I was not prepared for them to still be around, and I was definitely not expecting them to press charges. Trespassing into imperially protected preserve was what I was charged with. But the weird thing, I only spent a single night in jail before they let me go. I got a letter from the officer from someone calling himself the gardener, and a check for 400 centi. That letter gave me my first gig. He wanted me to mouse around in a buried basement of a boarding school in River City, take a few pictures of the floor and the children's drawings on it before putting them in an envelope and leaving it in a drop box. So, of course I did it. 400 centi is a lot of money. A lot more money than I was making at my present job picking up trash by the freeway. Little did I know at the time, it was just the beginning of my beautiful career with the gardener. He would have me mouse around some hidden area in one of the 7 cities, and then he would have me either take pictures, make a map of the tunnels, record what I saw, or in a few cases, he would have me retrieve something for him. At first, I didn't want to do that. After all, there's a big difference between being a mouse and being a cat burglar. But the money he offered me to grab a simple flash drive, well, surely a flash drive or a file or even a complete journal that was left buried for decades was practically public domain information, right? I was just grabbing proof, no different from taking a photo. And if you're wondering why I'm going into so much detail, that's because the last few journals I turned in, the gardener complained I didn't have enough details. So here, this one's for you, best buddy. But yeah, the job was pretty clear. 600 centi to go into some restricted section of a nuclear power plant that was slowly being decommissioned into safe storage, bring back a hard drive from the main server, and then there would be a dead drop figured out at a later time where he would get his hard drive and I would get my check. All I had to do was not get caught by the copper custodians and I would be home free. And unlike a lot of other jobs, which usually barely had some GPS coordinates and a rough idea where an entrance was. This one had a full address, guard rotations, a location within the power plant, even how to find that hidden door and the passcode used to get in. I almost never get jobs this easy, so I definitely know that whoever hired the gardener was probably the rightful owner to this place. That bolted my bleeding heart. I was just helping someone get their rightful property back from the imperial government. I was basically a hero to some people. That is what heroes do, right? That night, I traveled to the location. Some kind of power plant named CR3, not far from Swamp City. Thankfully, though, on the right side of the fence. I don't do jobs in Swamp City, not even the outskirts, not even for a million centi. I drove my motorcycle through the woods that led to CR3. Not because that there wasn't a road to CR3, there was, but the roads are watched, and the forest is a lot harder to set up a checkpoint in. Less than a kilometer from CR3, I parked my motorcycle and covered it in a green and gray tarp that made it look like it was just another part of the forest from the distance and from above. While human guards rarely explored this far into the forest, places like CR3 had aircraft, long-distance binoculars, and eyes well trained for the shiny parts of my motorcycle. But now covered in that tarp, their eyes would glaze over it and keep moving. This far out, I wore my hunter's camo and a hiking backpack with me. It carried my gear, but it was the ultimate part of my disguise. At least this far out. If anyone found me, I would just tell them I got lost from my camp, so they would point me back to where I needed to go without thinking about it again. I talked my way out of trouble a lot of times because people thought I was just lost or an idiot. But when I got closer to the power plant, I would need a very different disguise. After hiking that kilometer, I made it to the edge of the fence that separated CR3 from the forest. According to Gardner, there was a hole big enough to fit through that the guards didn't discover yet. And sure enough, there was. The edges were rusted, dull, and curved back on itself. Clearly someone used this hole a lot. If I was to guess, probably the guards themselves, needing a place to sneak out and probably smoke in the woods based on the amount of cigarette butts near the hole. Before going through the hole, it was time for the next part of my disguise. Removing my hunter's camo, folding it and putting it into my backpack, I stepped into the hole, standing up straight, as I walked with confidence towards the main entrance of the power plant. I was wearing a red polo shirt, khaki pants, and black shiny shoes. All of them were clean and pressed. Around my neck was a lanyard that had my picture on it, but otherwise was completely blank. I used this very same disguise to walk into banks, secured server sites, archaeological digs, and even government buildings. When you walk with confidence, people assume you belong. When you walk like you're annoyed, people assumed you were in charge. And by being dressed so well, I blended in from a distance. While every feature had the same security feature about requiring lanyards, the next place that followed up that policy with actually checking them to see if they belonged would be the first place to do so. While on some level that worried me a little, if this was all it took to sneak into a bank or a nuclear power plant, what was to stop someone who realized the same thing but had far worse intentions from me doing, well, far worse? Well, at least I know nothing that bad has happened yet, so maybe it just hasn't occurred to anyone else yet. Now inside the building, the security guard ahead of me actually held the door open for me. I smiled and said thank you to him as I made my way down the corridors. A few turns later and I was all alone as I saw a seemingly blank white wall that had two paintings, one of a sunset and the other of a sunrise. The trick to this was clever, at least in my opinion. the sunset painting would have to be turned upside down, and then the sunrise would have to be pushed up. Sure enough, when I did that, there was a click and the wall in front of me quietly slid aside. Not even a creak. I stepped inside of the dusty, dark corridor as the wall closed behind me before the fluorescent lights came on. Here, it was more of the same as the rest of CR3. White concrete walls, a few doors with a radioactive trefoil symbol. Thankfully, I wouldn't have to go into any room marked with radiation, which I am quite thankful for. The best part? It didn't take long to find the server room. I just followed the directions which led me past the offices. Not able to help myself, I peeked into the offices and sure enough, they looked like any other office I'd seen. Cubicles, filing cabinets, but the weirdest part was the smell. It was musty, for sure, and dusty, like other abandoned places I met, but there was also the smell of really old rot in the offices. I cannot explain it well, but if you know the smell, you know it. Like the smell of an old mausoleum that opened up for the first time in a long time. Or like a slaughter yard that hasn't been used for a few years. It was an old rot, but it didn't bother me too much. Still though, I decided to not go into the offices. There was probably old rotten food that had been sitting there for the last 10 years. Mold was a big killer in mousing, and I didn't have a mask with me to keep me safe from it. Finally making it to the server room, it was indeed still powered on, and I could see the flashing lights, and I could hear the fans moving, even through the door. Even after 10 years, the servers were still active. Whoever built this place intended it to last a long time. Entering the passcode at the door provided to me by Gardner, the door opened and a rush of cold, loud air pushed against me as I went inside. A thing a lot of people don't know because they normally only see server farms like these on TV was just how loud they can be. And I don't mean loud like your computer is working a little extra hard on this video game. I mean like loud like a motorcycle is loud. In an enclosed space that's almost as cold as a walk-in fridge. It can be a lot if you're not prepared for it, and if you spend a lot of time in them, you definitely need hearing and temperature protection. I read over the server names as I looked for the one that I was told to find. HRD 180. A lot of the servers were named things like SRV 124 or FLT 435 in an order I couldn't discern. Even though it took nearly 10 minutes, I finally found what I was looking for. Between MSU 890 and BU 012 was HRD 180. A quick flip of a single lever and I was able to grab the hard drive and pull it out. It wasn't big, maybe about the size of a brick made of black plastic with a single side made of metal. Carefully, I placed it into an anti-static bag I purchased on Gardner's recommendation. A lot of sensitive electronics can be damaged by even a small amount of static electricity, such as the same amount you get just from rubbing a backpack. Setting the hard drive into my backpack, I zip it up and take a picture of the server farm to send it to the gardener after this was all over. Proof of a job well done. Leaving the server room, I began to make my way back when I noticed a sign pointing to the right that I didn't see before on my way in. AU 189/HG 189 containment. And while my chemistry is basically non-existent, I did remember what AU meant. Gold. Looking around, I thought about it before I decided to just check down the hallway. It wouldn't hurt to confirm it if I was correct. Walking down the very long hallway, it finally ended in a large antechamber of sorts. On the wall opposite of me was a large metal door that was marked with the radioactive trefoil that was yellow with a red background. And below it, inside a yellow triangle, was two squiggly black arrows pointing to the left, which I didn't know what it meant, but I guessed it was a warning of sorts. Above the door was a green electronic sign that read stable. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I guessed it had to mean that the door was closed. And to the sides of the door, through foggy glass, I could see what was in the room. Piles upon piles of gold bars, all stacked on wooden pallets. The room itself was gray and silvery, but it was at least 100 meters back and 20 meters wide and 10 meters tall, with the gold bars stacked up a little over a meter in height. While I am not a gold expert, it was like I was peering into Fort Tanasi, where much of the gold reserves of the 7 cities are kept. I had seen bank vaults that had less gold in it, and this was just a few steps away from me. This next part was an easy choice for me. I am not super proud of it, but I know it was an easy choice and it was the right choice. This place was left to be decommissioned by the owners. They didn't mention anything about keeping the gold. They definitely didn't have plans for coming back to this place, and if the 7 cities knew about it, they would have torn this place up and just claim it as taxes before paving the emperor a new toilet or two. So I figured they wouldn't miss a bar or two. Fortunately, this door also had a number pad, but they had the same pin as the server farm. As I opened the door, the sign above turned red and now said, unstable. I propped the door open with a nearby chair as I made my way into the room, and just let myself wander, looking over all of this gold. I hadn't seen so much unclaimed wealth before. Finally, making my way to the end of the room, I saw a few piles that were just not finished yet, a little disorganized. So I figured it would be best to grab my bars here. They were very heavy. When I first came in, I was hoping to fill my backpack with the gold bars. But if I did that, it would have just been like trying to carry a truck in my backpack. I definitely would have been caught, or worse, ripped up my backpack. Still though, I managed to grab 2 bars and put it in my backpack as I slowly made my way out of the golden room, like I was a pack mule overladen. Inside of the room, I noticed that the walls were all a gray-silvery color, through and through, and it was quite unlike the white concrete of the rest of CR3. Taking a few more pictures as I left the room and closed the door, I figured that would come in handy later, especially if I wanted some leverage over the gardener. The door now shut and sealed, the sign switched from unstable back to stable. So I guess it was indeed the door. Leaving was a little easier than coming in, if not a lot more strenuous. I hadn't carried so much weight in my backpack since I used to go grocery shopping with it. Still, making my way back to my motorcycle, I switched my clothes again, shaking off some silvery drops off my clothes. It kind of reminded me of spray paint almost, except it wasn't dry and it felt very cold. I just hope it didn't stain my clothes, but if it did, I could certainly afford to replace it. I made it home without incident and sent my email with proof to the gardener, and set the hard drive down on my desk, so he would know what I did, and also he would know about the room full of gold. I figured he'd pay a lot of money for billions, if not trillions, in gold. Except, weirdly enough, he didn't seem interested in the gold at all. He just responded he would be by for the hard drive at the end of the week, and if I was well, I would get my check then. What did he mean, if I was well? I wasn't sure. Soon after, I went to bed, but I woke up after a few hours when I was feeling sick. I barely made it to the bathroom before I started puking. I didn't think too much about it at first. I just figured it was food poisoning. Except, I didn't feel better. I felt worse and worse as my shaky hands gripped the sides of the toilet seat. When the storm in my stomach finally calmed down enough, I tried to lean up from the toilet, only to realize that my hair was falling out and it was coating the floor. And I don't mean like it was shedding long strands. I had done that before and I created a surprising amount of hairballs throughout the years, but these were falling out in clumps and from the roots. After a few shaky breaths, I managed to pull myself to the sink and look at myself in the mirror. I looked like I wandered off from the Naglfari. My skin was pale and clammy, my eyes were red and bloodshot, and in fact, in one of my eyes, it even looked like a vessel had burst and was starting to turn red. My mouth had little sores forming around it, and when I opened my mouth in shock, a tooth fell out, clattering in the sink, blood soon following. Needless to say, I immediately emailed the gardener back, but he didn't respond. Even after emailing him 5 times, he never responded. After the 6th time, I got an automated response that the email did not exist. Now, not sure what to do, I checked my backpack, which I figured would still have the gold bars inside of it. The hard drive I took out right away and left it on my desk. But when I dragged my backpack over, I noticed that something silvery was leaking out from the bag. Finally, unzipping it, I noticed that my backpack no longer held gold bars. Instead, the bag was almost quarter full with a familiar silvery liquid with tiny gold flecks inside of it. The same liquid that was on my clothes when I took it out of the backpack. And now finally seeing it in such a large quantity, my confused mind made the necessary connection. Argentum vivum, living silver, also known in the mousing community by the rarer name of just mercury. Another hazard of exploring old factories and industrial sites. It was toxic just to breathe in the vapors, let alone to touch or, God forbid, to drink. And somehow the gold bars I picked up turned into quicksilver. I wasn't going to make it. That became clear at that point. When that realization came to mind, I decided I would go out explaining the risks as a warning to Gardner when he came here. Whatever AU-189 is, it's not normal gold. It made me sick just being near it. And then when I tried to take it with me, it melted into liquid silver. I implore you, you need to stay away from that gold, and you need to tell whoever hired you to find it, they need to bury it. Deep. Bury it so deep that no one will ever uncover it. Bury it so deep that it's forgotten. Bury it so deep that it will melt away in peace. The last of my teeth fell out about an hour ago. My hands are shaking too much to keep writing, and I know I will not survive much longer. And for posterity, for anyone reading this, wondering why I didn't call for help, I tried. Whether I called my friends, co-workers, the Vanguard, and for God's sakes, I even called the Vigilus Urbani hotline. Every time, I only got a message saying, "You cannot call this number." And as for why I didn't leave my house for help, whatever this is, it's radioactive and it's toxic. The bits of gold mixed with the liquid silver and in my blood remind me of its origin. I am a danger to the world if I leave, so I will not leave. Even as my hair falls out and so do my teeth, I will remain. Even as my skin peels away and my silvery bones and golden blood are visible to the world, I will remain. Even as my thoughts grow cloudy and my body grows misty for the safety of the world, I will remain. Results. The portable hard drive was obtained from the house of Creeping Jenny. The cleanup teams had to wear full hazmat protection while uploading the information to a secure server. The house was full of trace elements of AU-198 and HG-198. The entire property and the remnants of AU-198 had to be decontaminated before being disposed of. Creeping Jenny has not been found at this time, but is believed to be deceased. The missing AU-198 has not been found at this time. It is believed to have finished decaying into HG-198 by this point. Conclusion. The data was obtained successfully with an acceptable amount of casualties. The appropriation and distribution of AU-198 was unexpected, but it is likely to no longer be an issue after a few weeks when it all decays into HG-198. It is unlikely for the ensuing mercury poisoning to be noticed by the authorities. Analysis of data. The procedure to transmute large quantity of lighter elements into heavier elements, including delta radiating elements, such as lunarium, liquid diamond, and cold plasma, has been verified and is believed it will work elsewhere. Refining of experiment. 3 new sites have opened up around the world with the same capabilities of CR3, with far greater control over the facilities than CR3 ever had. Replication of experiment. With the new production facilities, expected quantities of AU-198 by the year's end are expected to exceed 500 metric tons for assault nuclear weapons, and exotic element production is expected to increase 5,000 times over. Once again, that is 5,000 times over, not 5,000%.